Serafina, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit more about Advance, because I think a lot of people know about Advance as a global network. We all know that exists. But what about the work that you're doing around innovation and fostering innovation? What's the organisation doing in relation to that?
Absolutely. We actually have a fantastic annual program in partnership with KPMG Australia, where we choose the very top of Australia's startups in the B2B space, later stage enterprise startups, and we help them scale and go global. One of the challenges Australia has is commercialising its innovation and ensuring that our companies are scaling globally from Australia, so the jobs and the investment remain in the country. And one particular success happened just last week. One of our companies that went through the program last year is a company called Simpro, who's based in Brisbane, and they are a project management software company for the trade industry. I met with Brad when he was on our program last year. We took them through LA, New York and San Francisco, and he was so inspired after 10 days and said to me, "It's really amazing. This 2 weeks in the States has actually saved us $200,000 and 2 years of R&D. The absolute networks that we have into customers, into partners, into talent, into advisors, into entrepreneurs has been beyond what he expected." And last week it was announced that Simpro, who are expanding into the US and UK, have just secured $31 million in capital raising. And he sent me an email to say that it was because of this program that Elevate 61 was a catalyst to understanding the US market. Because what we do is, complementing the work of Austrade, DFAT and other entities, we tap into that mateship. We tap into that 1 million Australians overseas who want to give their time. Many of whom, as an example in Silicon Valley, are repeat entrepreneurs, are investors. And what's important to remember, although we want Australians to return home, you don't have to repatriate the person to repatriate the experience and the networks. That's critical to remember.
So what do you have to do to qualify for this program?
Well, you have to be global. You have to be a company that has a product that is going to scale globally. And we actually help them with IP, with team, with setting up sales offices in the US. And what's critical to the work that we do is we don't want them to leave the country. We want them to expand from Australia. So we are investing in jobs back home.
Craig, you've taken advantage of this. Tell us how, and tell us about your company, Sendle.
So we went through the audition process for Elevate 61, which is quite a rigorous process of interviews and submissions. And then we went on the 2-week road trip. It is a really concentrated experience. It's kind of a double shot espresso to a cup of tea, or a Tesla to a tractor. It's that kind of experience. It's very intense. 50 meetings in 2 weeks. A lot of founders, a lot of investors. And it's that concentration that is so valuable. It certainly was for us. The fact that you're getting access to top-tier people in the US, you wouldn't be able to orchestrate that in 2 weeks on your own. It just would never happen. So the fact that they're lined up one after another makes it a very efficient use of time. And I think a little like the example that you used, Serafina, for us, I think, it's potentially saved us $1 million. I mean, I think that we could have steamed into the US market and fallen on our face and then had to regroup and go again. I think we've learned a lot about that particular market, and we've got a much clearer view on whether it's the next best fit in terms of international expansion.
Tell people a bit about Sendle, who might not know. What is the company? What does it do?
So Sendle is, we're here to help small businesses thrive by making delivery simple, reliable, affordable. So if you're operating a small business, then logistics are painful for you. And the idea of schlepping to the post office and paying over the counter, that being uncertain, expensive, not a lot of service and support involved, we've basically brought software and service design into the logistics industry for small business. So our view is that that's a big problem in Australia, and the business is growing very fast here. We think that's a problem elsewhere. We think small businesses are on the wrong end of institutionalised postal services, or the wrong end of big business logistics systems.
So basically you're trying to knock off Australia Post.
We're trying to knock off Australia Post.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the other things that Advance does. And Craig, I know you've been involved in the board for a long time, with the board for a long time, and you've been involved with Advance for a long time. What attracted you to the organisation initially?
So Jenny, for me, I came back to Australia at the beginning of 2009, having been away for 10 years. And one of the things that I was afraid of, actually, was, I love Australia and always have. But when I resigned from my global role, my boss said to me, who's a very well-known global CEO, said two things. He said, first of all, that's professional suicide. And the second thing he said is, Australia's a backwater. And as a proud Australian, I kind of, railed a little against that. But it did register with me, and I was very determined when I came back to Australia to make sure that I deepened and diversified my personal networks.
Was that hard to do, though, when you came back?
Which bit?
Well, all of that.
Yeah, look, to be honest, I struggled for a couple of years with this because I'd gone from working in a global role and flying around a lot, and it was a very privileged existence and exciting. But we made a family decision to come back for all the right reasons, which was still the right reasons, and I'm really happy we did. But it was a tough adjustment. And Advance was something of a lifeline, I have to say. I mean, through Advance, managed to meet a lot of very clever people well beyond my own industry. And so the trade-off for scale within one industry was the opportunity to meet, get to know, and ultimately work with a whole bunch of other people. So actually, I reminded Serafina backstage. Serafina introduced me to Narelle Hooper, who may well be here, who introduced me to James Chin Moody, who's my co-founder in Sendle. And so that little, those couple of little personal connections all came about through Advance.
Serafina, a few other examples of how Advance is helping to harness that talent we have overseas to make Australia more innovative.
Absolutely. We, as you will know, this evening have a global awards ceremony. And in 2013, our award for the overall winner was given to a gentleman called Russell Howard, who's a malaria expert. Russell had been living in the States for over 20 years, and he had just returned to Australia 6 months before the award. And he highlighted, and it's in press coverage as well, is because of that award, it reconnected him into the ecosystem in Australia, because he had lost all connection with Australia completely. No one knew him. And because of that award, he actually met Lucy Turnbull that day, who actually happened to be at the award ceremony. And given both their interest in the biomedical space, he then joined a board and is now chairman of a biomedical company. Other examples are, we all know Larry Marshall now, the Chief Executive CSIRO, Adrian Turner, the CEO of Data61, Michelle Guthrie, the Managing Director of ABC, all former board members of Advance. They have returned home recently. But what's important to remember is those three people, like many thousands, were giving back for many years beforehand, sharing their IP in China, in Singapore, in the US. I know Larry and Adrian had actually helped shape our first innovation program. So you think of 1 million people like that around the world that we can really harness, and we do that daily through the innovation programs, through the awards. We mentor university students. A couple of years ago, we mentored Marita Chang, who's become quite well known. I think she's 22 now, actually. Marita has a robo company, and she was mentored by Peter Levere, who has a solar company in Silicon Valley. He was one of our award winners. And she highlighted that the 12 months of mentoring while she was in Australia, he was in the US through Skype, actually helped save her so much money in her startup. And actually what she appreciated most with the mentoring was, he helped me think global from the day dot. And that's the critical thing. And we do this day in, day out across the world.
Craig, just finally, have you used the idea of Brand Australia to advance your business?
Yeah, look, we have. I think that Australians travel well and are received well typically, and that's a tremendous advantage. So having worked in Europe and Asia and spent some time in the US, I think that is advantageous. I think the fact that we are generally kind of humble and quick to self-deprecate, I think that's a virtue, and that we've got a sense of humour even in business and even under pressure. I think that's definitely a virtue. But I would also say I wouldn't want to lean on it too hard. So while there's a tremendous generosity in the Advanced network, and people are very willing and supportive, and that's really powerful. Again, I don't think that we should lean on that too much, because you realise in the big wide world how much competition there is out there, And getting any kind of innovation, getting any traction around innovation, getting any momentum behind a startup, it's very challenging. And there's kind of no substitute for kind of hunger and hard work.
Good note to end on. Thank you very much, Serafina and Craig. Great to talk to you both.
Thank you.
Please thank Serafina and Craig.